Hey everyone, it's Jim
And Charles
from Mellow Amps. And today, in episode number 9, we're going to talk about the Rocket Preamp release, at least to the general public. And we got a whole bunch more things to update. So let's get started. But first, caution everyone, electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult a professional technician when in doubt. Now that the test builder phase is almost done for the Rocket, it's time to release the kit to the public. A big thank you to our test builders who helped identify a noise issue. They have now, the first builders have now installed a mod, which we could, in fairness, call a bodge. a bodge is sort of a not so nice way to refer to a modification. It's not a big mod, though. Mm-hmm. And the noise is just, that little bit of noise is just completely gone. And we've updated the build manual to reflect the reduced noise floor. And interestingly, the second harmonic came up flat across the audio frequency band. Now, not a huge amount. It's way down at 66 dB below fundamental. Fundamental is just the audio signal, or whatever is important. I mean, if you're running a frequency generator through a piece of gear you're testing, the frequency of the frequency generator, let's say you were running 3,000 cycles or 3,000 hertz, that would become the fundamental. So, in fact, the noise floor is so low now that the second harmonic establishes the noise floor. Now, the second harmonic is beneficial. In most cases, it's what you want.
You can have too much of it, but a little bit of it is actually really quite nice.
Yeah, we learned this a long time ago, and we did. I think when we were working on the development of the Universal 6R12SN7 kit preamp, it was one of the first kits that Charles and I worked on together. We discovered completely by accident while we were making changes and more changes that we had brought the second harmonic up in the version that we really liked the sound of.
And dropped the third harmonic well below it at the same time, which made a big difference with the sound.
Yeah, so the only thing that is left is, as far as noise floor, is a little spike at 120 hertz, and that's just a little bit higher than 66 dB. And that's really quite common. You're going to have, in any piece of electronic gear, you're going to have some noise that is at 50 or 60 hertz, depending on what your mains power frequency runs at. In Europe, I think it's all 50 hertz, and half of Japan.
Which must be fun.
Yeah, I mean, the island is divided, I think, east-west. So one side is 50 hertz and the other side is 60.
It might actually be north-south, but
anyways,
yeah,
it's sort of like a slice right down the island.
But back to the point, though, you'll have 50 or 60 hertz on the low end, and you'll have 100 to 120 hertz on the top end. And that's just power supply noise. You get the higher frequencies after it's been switched with diodes, and power supply filtering will get rid of almost all of that, but unless you have a lot of stages of filtering, you're going to have a tiny little bit of it present somewhere.
Yeah, so our job is to get it so low that you can't hear it. And
that's where we're at.
That's where we're at, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing with the little bit of noise floor is that the original prototype didn't have any of that. And somehow it sneaked through into the kits that we sent out to test builders, and we missed it. And we missed it on our live listening tests. Our system here in the music room is 93 dB efficient, which is getting up. I would say it's the beginning of very high efficiency. There are speakers that go a lot more efficient than that, but it's the beginning of high efficiency. and we didn't hear it. In fact, we didn't hear it until after test builders started saying, "Hey, wait a minute, there's
a higher noise floor than there should be here." Yeah. So we messed up the testing a little bit. We learned some valuable lessons from it that we're going to apply to other kits in the future, which we've already applied to the Phono and not found any issues with, thankfully.
Yeah, Charles developed a whole new set of bench testing procedures that really worked brilliantly to isolate the problem. In fact, Charles we knew what the problem was, but we didn't know where it was, and Charles figured it out.
Meticulously working my way through it. But yeah, it ended up being a grounding issue and somewhat related to having it in a realistic system. And that's just how we missed it. So it can happen to anybody, but we're glad that we found the issue and have a fix for it.
So the thing that was really surprising is knocking that noise floor down even further. Made the performance, the sound of the Rocket so much cleaner. I mean, it sounded very good in its production version 1.0. We're now on 1.1, of course, and I could hear the difference. Believe it or not, I could hear the difference in the kitchen while I was preparing dinner, and I thought, what in the world is going on? How come that sounds so different? So I came into the living room and I'm like, my goodness, we know this. I mean, as designers, we know this intricately, that the lower the noise floor, the better the detail. That is just a standard rule. In fact, in Friday's Tube Lab, we're going to talk a little bit about positioning and volume levels of gear in system to get the lowest noise floor possible. Just through how you set things up.
Yeah, if you've got multiple volume controls spread around, it does matter which ones you have turned up and which ones you don't.
Yeah, so we'll be doing that tomorrow, hopefully. So I'm just totally thrilled with how this little guy sounds. Now, the interesting thing is you might think, how can a little box like this that doesn't really cost that much sound that good? And we asked ourselves the same question. But then we remember, we spent, 6 months developing it?
Yeah, even longer on the precursors of the circuit and getting experience with the tubes that are involved in it. And a lot of time just iteratively testing it and fine-tuning the circuit.
Yeah.
And it's simple, it's effective, it works great, and it sounds absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and it's a testament to what a very simple a pure Class A design. So no feedback. The tubes are operating in pure Class A, and the attention to the short signal paths and the ground return paths as well, which is what caught us, of course. It can make a huge difference. In fact, a preamp that's huge, that's filled with tubes, is not necessarily going to be what you want. In fact, a preamp that's filled with a lot of switches and options like remote controls, all of that stuff just clutters the circuit up, makes the kit much more expensive, and none of that does anything to help the sonics. In fact, in many cases, it's going to degrade the sound.
Yeah, more things that can go wrong and more things that can produce noise.
Yeah, and interfere with the signal path. So, yeah. So now that we've got we're releasing the Rocket to the general public, we've also made a production run of completed kits. So, because the kit uses a universal transformer, we can supply a version for everyone in the higher voltage region. So anyone that's 220 to 240 volts AC for their mains, and everybody that is in the lower voltage region, which is about 110 to maybe 125 volts AC. Typically, it's around 120 volts. The higher regions tend to focus around 230 volts. That's sort of the center voltage. But tube gear as a whole can generally accept a lot of fluctuation in mains voltage. Not while you're running it. They don't like the mains voltage going. They will operate it, but you know, they will go a little crazy, especially
if your voltage drops 10 volts, you're going to hear it.
well, especially we have an R8 integrated amp that we use mostly these days for clearing power tubes. We sell a lot of quads of vintage power tubes, and for the live listening test to make sure the tubes are quiet, don't have microphonics, and sound good, we bias them up in the R8, and because there's a bias meter on the front of it, I can actually watch as the mains voltage shifts and the bias shifts. Now, it doesn't shift a lot, but if the voltage in our house goes down 5 or 10 volts, or up 5 or 10 volts, the bias shifts.
Yeah, it does affect the performance.
Yeah. So, anyways,
so we have kits of the Rocket available and packed for both voltage zones. We have completed pre-built units that are ready to go as well for both voltage zones. And they're in the store right now and ready to head on out. So the Rocket is basically done and ready for you guys to enjoy.
Which means we can move on. So we have a couple of things that are in the docket next. A docket refers to a criminal, doesn't it? No, this is nothing like a criminal, but they're in the lineup would be a better way of saying this. It's almost like English is not my first language. But we're going to actually work on a modification board for the Wilsonton R8, which desperately needs it. Nobody is doing it. There's been a lot of modifications and stuff online. It's a very popular commercial amplifier. And I still consider it to be one of the best buys out there if you want a bigger Class A/B amplifier.
The cost per performance is absolutely incredible, but the bias boards that it comes with use a strange proprietary pot, which we don't like. We ran into issues when we had to replace ours, and
the pot is not. It's probably the weakest link in the entire amp.
Yeah, and we've wanted to make an upgrade board for it for a while, not just for our system, but to help all of our customers that have them themselves, because there's probably a lot of Wilsontons out there that are just unusable because those pots can't be replaced easily.
Yeah, or people don't know how to do it. Anyways, that'll actually be a short project. It's not going to take us 6 months. If it does, we're not doing something right. But as soon as we're done getting that board designed, we're going to start filming the new modern line kit Phono preamp, and it's basically ready to go. The parts are actually in stock, and they have been for months. But we've been trying to get the Rocket done. We run a very small company, and we have two companies.
And there's only so many hours in the day.
So our first priority is to get tube orders out to customers and kit orders out to customers quickly. I hate the idea of anybody waiting for their product to come. So that's our number one priority. So even if we're in the middle of developing something, we stop and we ship the orders, and then we come back to development work. So, and it's been incredibly busy. We've had the busiest, the previous 3 months, December, January, and February have been incredibly busy. We've never seen a January like the one we just finished. So, and so we're shipping tubes and kits, and there is no second shift available. I'm too old for working 16-hour days anymore, and
we're going to shoot the build videos for the Phono, and then we're going to be asking for test builders. And we already have, I think, 4 on the list.
I have 4 on the list. We haven't called out for test builders, but people really need a good sounding Phono preamp in their system, and that's the reality of playing records. If you don't have a good sounding Phono preamp, it doesn't matter how good your records are. The sound is going to suck. And one of the first designs I did for myself personally, before we had the kit business, was a Phono preamp, because I kept bringing in high quality Phono preamps that people would recommend, and they sounded awful. And then I said, well, that's enough of that. I'm going to design my own. And I realized there's a lot of people in the same boat as I am that just their phono preamps suck big. So, anyways, yeah, this is a great sounding phono preamp, all tube. It won't be as quiet as a solid state phono preamp. There's just no way to make a piece of tube gear that quiet. Solid state devices, their self noise is a lot lower than the self noise of a vacuum tube. That's just the reality of it.
And it's amplifying a very low signal quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it is great sounding though. And it follows the same philosophy that the Rocket does and that all of our other kits do, which is no feedback, simplest circuit, short signal pass, and it is entirely passive in the way that it does the equalization on it as well, which we think makes a big difference.
Yeah, so there is no feedback circuit, which is very, very common, even among some of the really highly respected vintage and modern phono preamps. They use a feedback network that we did some initial experiments with when we first developed the classic line version of this, and they were a bear to work with. They were awful, and I said passive is the way to go. So, and we could take credit for this design, but really it comes down to the 6SL7, 12SL7 tube that we used. In fact, I think we have a rebased Lochtel in here.
Yeah, those are the 7F7s that we rebased over into a 6SL7.
Yeah, and we, as a cathode follower on the modern line, we're running the 6N6P. And those two tube types are fabulous. The mid-range warrant that a 6SL7 brings to the Sonics is just to die for. It's on the same level as a Muller DL34 XF2. And there is no high gain tube made that comes close to what the 6SL7 is like. And it's a real shame. A lot of designers went with the 12AX7 for their phono preamps. And frankly, the 12AX7 is a mediocre sounding tube. There are some very good vintage versions of it. And there's a couple that are still left that are available. But some of the best versions are extinct now. There's just no access to a true Mullard or a true Telefunken. So we actually still have some Matsushitas and we have some RFTs, new old stock vintage versions.
Yeah,
and
even those are getting hard to find.
They sound good though, but they can't compare to a 6SL7. The 6SL7, if you want a warm, rich mid-range, the 6SL7 blows those 12AX7s out of the water every time. And that's, as designers, we started design with an idea of what the piece of gear is going to do. Is it going to be a headphone amp? Is it going to be a high-gain preamp in the case of the Rocket? Is it going to be a great sounding phono preamp?
And build it around a tube.
And then we find the tubes.
Yeah.
And then we design the circuit. And the tubes, they're almost the first thing we start thinking about, if not the first thing. And unfortunately, a lot of designs coming out, it's like the tubes are, we'll just, whatever tube we decide to use, we use. And people forget the tubes are the amplifiers.
Yeah.
And never forget that, because this piece of chassis here, take the tubes out, and it's literally nothing but a vessel to hold the tubes. So, now it's important it's got a decent transformer and decent components, and the circuit's well designed.
Everything else does matter, but the tubes do the main job.
Yeah. So there's nothing else in the box that's actually doing the amplification. It's all in the tubes. So we keep repeating that. So there's some exciting times ahead, and of course there's some new designs in the pipe that are coming, but we won't be putting a lot of work into them until the phono preamp is released, and then there'll be something new and really exciting. And I think it's going to be one of the headphone designs.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, Charles was saying we should get this thing going and get the parts ordered. So.
Okay, now we've got one more thing to talk about here. We do have a couple of review units of the Rocket 6N1P preamp. So if you're a YouTuber, if you have a channel out there with maybe some followers, if you're interested in reviewing one of these, We have some pre-built units. We could also send you a kit if you're interested in building a kit too.
As part of the review.
Yeah. Now, we aren't going to send anything for free because we don't think it's an honest review from people whenever that happens.
Yeah, we don't. If you followed our 2 channels and dealt with our store, you know that we're straight up. So we're not paying for reviews, and what we want is an honest, above board reviewer who has an established reputation, and will live or die on the review. That's I feel confident enough with version 1.1 that whoever reviews it is just going to be blown away, but maybe not, in which case we'll have to take the criticism. But yeah, so
if you're interested, just toss us a message, or throw a comment on the channel, or send us an email through the Mellow Amps website.
That would be best. Yeah, and we can start a conversation going. So I think that's it for the update. This is Jim
And Charles.
signing off. Stay safe, everyone, and have fun.